Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, we've talked about this matter for, off and on for the last 2 years, because that's how long it's been going. Just this segment of the problem that is the state of Illinois, the worst governed state in the nation by almost every quality of life and financial stability metric, and that is the lack of a constitutionally mandated balanced budget. We're under a stopgap budget. Governor Ronner, legislative leaders can't agree on what is next. Governor Ronner issued a release yesterday canceling
Today's meeting
with legislative leaders, because saying, well, look, we're just sawing sawdust. Until the Democrats want to present a budget, then there's not much to talk about. We just have an hour meeting. We both come out and restate the positions that we've stated and restated ad nauseum for 2 years, and it's kind of a waste of everybody's time. So the impact of terrible public policy, the human impact, that's always the challenge, right? Because we talk about numbers that are in the millions and billions, and they're difficult to translate down in terms of actual human impact, and that's what public policy all is about, helping or hurting other human beings. So interestingly, there is another documentary that attempts to chronicle the plight of individuals in Illinois as a result of bad public policy. This is produced by Kaar Films, which I believe produced Hoop Dreams. Yeah. And it's a web series called Stranded by the State. And we're pleased to be joined by Liz Kaar, who's an independent documentary filmmaker and the creator of this web series in conjunction with Kaar Films and In These Times, called Stranded by the State. Liz, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So give us a little bit of the backstory on Stranded by the State and what this web series seeks to explore and highlight.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as the budget impasse has continued to stretch on and on, we see that the most vulnerable people in the state of Illinois are continually hit the hardest by it. And so what I wanted to do with Stranded by the State is to really go across Illinois and talk to the people being affected, the families, the students, the senior citizens, and talk to them about what they see. So I've gone, I've profiled people in Chicago to, rural communities in central Illinois to Alton, Illinois, more southern in the state. So I've really crossed the state, crossed ages, races, and really, it's hitting everybody.
And so what have you learned, though, about, ultimately how much it costs how much this is costing taxpayers more in the long run when you put off austerity programs?
Right. I mean, I think that's the thing that I found most interesting as I was exploring this series is most of these programs are cost-effective, preventative programs. So if you intervene early, you spend a fraction of the amount. I mean, we're talking 10%, 5%, in some cases, than you would if you just wait. You know what I mean? Because if you don't do preventative counseling, let's say for preventative things, let's say counseling for at-risk youth, you wait, and potentially in 5 years, 10 years, they could end up in jail. They could end up, if they're still young, in DCF residential placement. That's way more expensive than just the initial preventative counseling. Same thing with senior citizens, Meals on Wheels and home health care workers, coming into the home, just doing for an hour a day or something like that. So much cheaper than a Medicaid nursing home, So cutting these programs is ultimately costing more for the taxpayers in the long run, let alone, our kind of moral obligation as people in a society that cares about other people. I think that's first and foremost. We don't want seniors starving in rural Illinois. That's not okay. These Meals on Wheels programs being cut.
Uh-huh.
But even beyond that, it's it also just costs taxpayers more in the long run. So it's really bad every way you look at it.
Well, so Illinois has about $230 billion in total debt. This according to Truth in Accounting. and about $30 billion in assets. So a debt-to-asset ratio of greater than 7-1, which is what we call in simple math bankruptcy. And so I wonder if there's any review of all the money that has been expended, particularly with respect to the big systems, K through 12 education, Medicaid, transportation infrastructure, and public sector pensions. That's where about 85 to 90% of the budget goes. And what we have received in terms of value in return.
Well, that's not exactly what that's a big question.
Yeah.
And that's not exactly what in the purview of the series. This is an 8-part series kind of looking at different issues around the states. So, that could be like each video is 7 minutes. What you're talking about could be like 8 parts.
Right.
Hour long.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Thing,
well,
so.
I mean, you know where I'm going, though. It's like one of these things where we have to examine inputs, no question, but we have to connect them to outputs, right? What we're getting for what we're spending, whether it's just a specific program within the Department of Human Services or it's some of these, larger systems that I referenced, like K through 12 education. Don't we have to connect inputs to outputs?
Well, I mean, I think when you talk about K through 12 education, I'm not exactly sure what you're saying in terms of input output. I just maybe haven't heard it framed that way, but K through 12 education, I think the whole point of educating, there's multiple points to educating, but one big part is that people can get good jobs and become productive citizens,
right.
And but also then they support their community, and they support their community through being a good person and working in that community, but also paying taxes. You know what I mean, and kind of creating a community in both ways.
No.
And I think,
yeah, I get that. I mean, and I agree with that. But I'm just saying, so, for example, you mentioned higher ed. One of that's the aspect of one of the aspects that you cover is higher education. And it's an interesting thing about colleges, universities in Illinois. The state provides twice as much support to Illinois colleges and universities as compared to their conference peers, and yet tuition in Illinois colleges and universities, public, is 25 to 40% higher than their conference peers. So U of I gets twice as much support, for example, but it costs 25 to 40% more for in-state tuition as compared to Indiana for an Indiana resident. And so that's what I'm talking about. I say, well, why is it so much more expensive with a heightened subsidy in Illinois as compared to Indiana or Iowa or Missouri or anywhere else in the Great Lakes? Perhaps there are higher, better uses of this money, like those social services you were talking about.
I'm not sure about what's happening currently. I went to school in Wisconsin. I went to a public university, and it was about the same as Illinois if you were an in-state resident. I was a Minnesota resident at that time. So, I'm not exactly sure about the numbers currently across all of that. But I would say, in the reality, in terms of how much the state puts in and how much there's been a trend across the entire country in terms of defunding public higher education, and Illinois is not the worst. They're in the middle of the pack in terms of funding, defunding public higher education. There are some states that have really gutted it. And I think the thing is it's important. We want people to be in the middle class and to, not use public assistance and to become productive tax-paying citizens. And, I think it's like, well, higher education is that last step off that ladder. And, what we're doing right now is we're defunding MAP grants. Low-income students, like, MAP grants are funded right now, and MAP grants are like the state version of the Pell Grants for low-income students. And it's like, that's really their only opportunity to get into the middle class, and so, it's not right what we're doing, and I think it's counterintuitive and counterproductive.
All right, we're speaking with Liz Kaar, independent documentary filmmaker, creator of the new web series Stranded by the State, where you follow families, workers, and students living through the Illinois budget crisis. Knowing what you know and revealing what you've revealed in these series, would you want to live in Illinois? Would you want to raise your children here?
do. I love Illinois, actually. I love Chicago, where I live, and I don't think it's good to just leave if you don't like it. I mean, I think it's different if you've lost your job and you can only get a job in another state. You know what I mean? That totally understand. But I think it's important to stay and try to fix it. You know, like I really believe in that. So I want to stay here for the long term. You know, if I can, and try.
So
to
you
really
think
work
there's
to
hope?
fix it. What?
You think there's hope for Illinois and for the lawmakers to get it together?
I do. I mean, I think there's hope for Illinois, you know, and I think even in that first episode of Public Higher Education, you know, the great students at Eastern Illinois University in Charleston, Illinois, you know, they created this Fund EIU campaign, and they were really, you know, just to say, we love this university, and we care about it, and we want it to stay, and they created this great movement, and I think that's, you know, I think that gives me hope, you know, that people are out there that care and want to stay and want to work for it. And I think there are people that want to work for it.
By the way, just a point of order on that, I just looked up the numbers, 2015, 2016 tuition numbers. In-state for Wisconsin, $10,399. In-state for U of I, $15,628. So that's that would be 50% higher in Illinois as versus Wisconsin.
Is that UW-Madison?
UW-Madison, yes.
Okay.
These are Big Ten figures. So this is the thing that's frustrating for people that have watched Illinois build up $230 billion in debt while only retaining $30 billion in assets and having all of the big things that government's supposed to do in cardiac arrest and unfinanceable, because we just focus on spend, spend, spend. Every time somebody says, I'm not getting the money I deserve, that's a crisis. But it's never a crisis when somebody gets an unbelievable amount of resources and produces nothing for generation after generation after generation, like, say, for the example of Chicago Public Schools. And then, despite all of that taxing and spending, we find ourselves one of the worst states in the nation when it comes to providing services for the developmentally disabled. I mean, this is not something that's happened since Bruce Rauner has been governor. This is not a 2-year crisis. This has been a crisis that has been building and metastasizing for the last 50 years. And now we're at this point where we've really limited our options because we weren't paying attention.
Yeah, I mean, I agree this hasn't happened in the last 2 years. I think, you know, from where I stand, I don't think, you know, some of the things Bruce Rauner has suggested is necessarily the right steps. You know, I think, but, you know, just going back to Chicago Public Schools, my boyfriend actually is a Chicago Public School teacher, and, you know, it's, in terms of output, what you're saying, it's like, you know, I see him. You know, he comes home, he's exhausted. He works really hard. His class sizes are huge. Every year he gets less and less support because you cut funding more and more and more, and this has been happening for decades. And so it's kind of this thing where you say, oh, well, you know, they're so inefficient, they're so horrible, they're not graduating students or whatever. But it's like, if you keep cutting funding, you know, they're never going to get better. There's less resources.
But
and wait, I just want to.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
His parents are teachers in the suburbs, and he comes from a whole family of teachers, and I think it's a very noble profession, teaching. It's an incredibly hard job that people don't give enough credit to. But I think, you know, and there's more resources in the suburbs, and they actually have more staff. They have like a curriculum director who will then actually help the teachers plan the curriculum, which will then make everything much more efficient and actually give the students a better education. But because you cut funding, you have to cut that position in Chicago Public Schools or wherever, and things become less and less efficient, and kids get worse and worse educations. And so I think it's this flip way of seeing it. It's like, well, let's like fund it less, and then you know, expect people to be more efficient. And I don't think that works.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, so here's the problem, and this is why it's so difficult to foster any system change here, because we can't agree on what's actually happening. I mean, I agree with everything you said about teachers. Here's the problem: Chicago Public Schools spends $15,500 per kid. That's about 40% more than in Wheaton, where I grew up, and it's significantly more than most public school districts throughout the state, including in suburban Cook and the Collier counties. So it's, and in point of fact, spending on K through 12 education, including CPS, has gone up at a 45-degree angle for the last 20 years. And what do we have to show for it? we're not really doing a better job educating kids, and so many have left. I mean, there's only about 60% of the kids in CPS that were in CPS 50 years ago. So what does that say? It's a great school system that's attracting families? Obviously, it's not. But I wish you luck with this documentary. I'm looking forward to seeing it because I care about these issues, but unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm going to have to get the last word on that. But Liz Kaar, who is an independent documentary filmmaker, the creator of the new web series Stranded by the State, we'll have you back to discuss this and discuss these videos as you come out. I mean, I really want to have a running dialogue on these topics, so we'll definitely have you back.
I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Liz. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.